Good day, everyone. I am Gracial Andarantino, and this is Environmental Hazard and Risk Assessment. What is the difference between a hazard and a risk? This might be an easy question, but it's probably not. There appears to be some confusion between the two. A hazard can be identified as anything that can cause harm. A risk is a potential that a hazard will cause harm. For example, standing on anything unstable is a hazard. Falling and being injured is a risk. At the office, a filing cabinet drawer left open is a hazard. Having someone tripped and caused injury to themselves is a risk. In the case of our municipality, there are barangays that are geographically situated near the coastal and rivers. So seas and rivers are hazards and flooding is a risk. Environment. What is environment? Simply, the environment is the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, and the places where we live, work, and play. And if there are extreme events or substances in the earth and its ecological system that may cause adverse consequences for humans and things they value, it is a hazard. Therefore, environmental hazard is an event which has the potential to threaten the surrounding natural environment or adversely affect people's health, including pollution and natural disasters such as storms, volcano, and earthquakes. It is the state of events which greatly affects the surrounding and people's health. Likewise, people can affect the health of the environment. We all hear these terms on a daily basis, so-and-so, a chemical, physical, cultural, and biological agent poses a risk. As such, we often classify hazards according to their causal agents. Natural events that are infrequent, like earthquakes, hurricanes, and relatively common, the blizzards, coastal erosion, and typhoon. Technological events, like extreme and common events such as power plant accidents and chemical spills. Social disruptions, like the terrorism, riots, warfare. Biological agents or biohazards, like the epidemics, infestations, and bioterrorism. And chronic and global significant hazards, like the climate change, pollution, and environmental degradation. This or that product is hazard, or behaving a certain way is unsafe. Environmental degradation is the disintegration of the earth or the deterioration of the environment through the consumption of assets. For example, air. The best example we see daily are the fuel combustion in automobiles and industries. Water, in a way that pathogenic organism from the waste dump into the water, causing human diseases, and soil, like mining and domestic waste. Hence, the destruction of environments and the eradication of wildlife. In addition, environmental hazards can be classified as traditional or modern. The traditional hazards are related to poverty and mostly affect low-income people and those in developing countries. Modern hazards caused by technological development prevail in industrialized countries where people exposure to traditional hazards is low. Low-income people increasingly experience a double burden of traditional and modern environmental health risk. In rich countries, they experience twice the burden of illness and death from all causes and 10 times greater disease burden from environmental risks. Therefore, environmental changes and ecological effect is created or driven by consolidation of an effectively substantial and expanding human populace and planned urbanization, constantly expanding monetary development or per capita fortune, and the application of assets exhausting and polluting technology as a result of economic growth. The Philippines is one of the most natural hazard-prone countries in the world, and reducing the risk of disasters will be key to achieving the development goals of the country. Generally speaking, risk is the likelihood of injury, disease, or death. Going further along these lines, we can define environment risk as the likelihood of an injury, disease, or death resulting from human exposure to a potential environmental hazard. And risk can be quantified as a product of a probability of an event or likelihood of occurrence of the hazard and its severity measured in terms of exposure and the nature of the consequences. In the case of domestic waste, deficiencies in the management, waste transport, and waste treatment and disposal, several pollutants are released into the environment, which cause serious threats to human health along the way. Another example would be in a physical hazard. The severity of the hazard can be represented by the level of damage to life, property, and other related damages, and the probability of the hazard is the living in the disaster-prone areas. Similarly, an example of chemical substance that is sealed and stored in a bottle, although it is intrinsically a hazardous substance, if used and managed as described, it presents a little or no risk to people or the environment. Risk is always a probability influenced by the level of exposure. However, some types of risk are hard to quantify, either because of the complexity of a system, like in the case of climate change, or because we still lack some of the tools to measure it, like in the case of nanomaterials. Nevertheless, amidst of intricacy and inefficiencies due to the lack of tools to accurately quantify risk, implementing strategies are put in place in order to minimize losses and severity of potential risk, what is so-called risk management. So what is an environmental risk management? An environmental risk management is a system of recognizing and assessing environmental risk with the overall goal of reducing it to an acceptable level by implementing and monitoring mitigation measures. Accident is a result from an event of uncontrolled risk. Proper risk assessments are crucial to preventing accidents, cutting down on injuries, and even saving lives. The risk assessment process can be summarized as shown in the diagram. The first, or initially, is a hazard identification, gathering and identifying the source of risk, what's going to cause a problem, visiting, characterize, and document those sources. Second and third process can be summed up to analyzing those hazards, the frequency, and looking at the likelihood of that hazard to occur and the consequence of that, knowing who is at risk and evaluating the risk. To evaluate the risk, we have to take many factors into consideration. How, where, how much, and how long can be exposed to the hazards are all things to be taken into account. The fourth risk assessment process is starting to look at the control measures or mitigating measures. How are we going to control that risk and prevent that outcome from occurring? And fifth process is reviewing those control measures once we've put that in place to see whether now with those measures in place is that risk or what we call residual risk is acceptable. And if it's not, we need to put more measures in place. To give a better picture, an example would be households living near the rivers, lakes, and coastal areas. To apply the risk assessment process, first, identifying hazards would be those bodies of water where households live near them that will cause flooding. Documenting those hazards affecting its welfare and characterizing its level of severity to identify and set prioritization to the most affected ones. Second and third process, analyzing. Flooding will be caused by many factors such as water level rise and more often than not, uncoordinated waste disposal. Where this will also result to clogging of drainage water systems and human diseases, apart from the impact of rising water levels. Fourth, control measures. So in order to reduce its impact to property, humans, and the environment, structural and non-structural control measures will be put in place, such as reservoir or flood walls, seawalls, resettlements, or removing people and property out of risk areas and the like. Others would be the construction and or rehabilitation of drainage canals, the declogging and desilting of those canals, and the strict implementation of solid waste management in the locality, which begins at source. Fifth, reviewing those mitigating measures, documenting its improvement from the likelihood of getting harmed from disasters and the like. With all this laid down for use, for us to clearly get the idea of the difference between the risk management and risk assessment process. So therefore, in a nutshell, risk assessment establishes whether risk is present, and if so, the range or magnitude of that risk assessment are integrated with other considerations, such as economic or legal concerns, to reach decisions regarding the need for practicability of implementing various risk reduction activities. Thus, the use of risk assessment results as basis for communicating risk to interested parties and the general public. And for me, since I am assigned at the planning office of our agency, we work with the Disaster Risk Reduction Management Office in the formulation of the climate disaster risk assessment of our municipality. And this topic gives much importance in the creation of such. Not only that, in our day-to-day activities, risk assessment is substantial at our homes, in our workplace, and in the surrounding as a whole. Let's take a look at this video.
This could be the most important minute of your day.
We have been through difficult times and face big problems ahead.
But every crisis contains both danger and opportunity.
You can play your part.
Right now.
Right now.
Please close your eyes. Imagine the better future we could have.
Imagine that future.
What does it look like for you?
How do we lift each other up
And make it fresh.
How do we protect nature?
and save our shared home?
Picture that future you want.
Open your eyes.
It's time to talk about the future we want.
Risk can thus be managed by limiting exposure to danger and by the adoption of risk reduction measures. Prevention might be a better idea to reduce risk. Let's heal nature and heal humans. Thank you for listening.